Quest Diagnostics has been publishing the drug testing index since 1988, essentially. So we have 26 years worth of data, 1988 through 2014, representing more than 150 million urine, oral fluid, and hair workplace drug tests. So again, the key thing to remember that this is just workplace data. And it's only workplace data from those employers who include drug testing as a part of their employee screening program. So all those other employers, not like you, they're getting all the drug users, and we'll see that data. The other data set that we're going to be talking about is the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. This is recognized as really a definitive source of information about drug and alcohol use among the broader US society. It's an annual survey of about 68,000 people, surveying individuals 12 years of age or older. And again, it's self-reported use. So our data is workplace testing data, provides a great insight into what's happening within workplaces. This data represents broader societal trends, and it's sort of interesting to compare and contrast what we're seeing in our workplace data with what's seen in the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. So what are our key findings? So the percentage of American workers testing positive for illicit drugs increased for the second consecutive year in the US general workforce. We were a little quiet about it last year. 1 year doesn't a trend make, but we now have 2 consecutive years of increases. Marijuana increased for the second consecutive year. Interestingly, we talked about marijuana last year in the fact that we saw large increases in Colorado and Washington. And while we saw increases again this year, those increases were on par with what we saw nationally. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the data. Cocaine increased in the US general workforce over the last 2 years, which is really reversing a period of decline that we've been reporting on recently. Amphetamines use, and specifically the use of methamphetamine, the drug that's associated with the clandestine laboratories, showed an increase across both urine and oral fluid tests. Positivity for 6-acetylmorphine, the heroin-specific metabolite, doubled between 2011 and 2014. And if that doesn't scare us, it should. And what's to me is very striking is that we're seeing these increases broadly across a variety of illicit drugs. This is not prescription drugs that we've been talking about recently. These are illicit, illegal drugs. So let's talk about the annual positivity rate first. So 26 reporting periods here, 27 reporting periods, I should say, between 1988 and 2014. We've seen either steady declines or no change over the course of that time period in all but 4 of those 26 intervals. A high of 13.6% in 1988, 3.9% in 2014, and it really steadily declined up through 2012 when it was at 3.5%. Of those 4 increases, 4 years with increases, they were just in the last 2 years. So think about that. Between 1988 and 2012, the positivity rate only increased 2 times. So it really is striking that we're seeing these differences. And if you look at the data, the 2014 data is at a level not seen since 2005, 2006. So that's a long time since we've seen overall positivity for the combined US workforce being at such a level. As we look at data from the National Survey of Drug Use and Health and compare that to what we're seeing in the drug testing index. So now we're comparing self-reported use with the drug testing index data. This next set of bars represents National Survey of Drug Use and Health, self-reported use of an illicit drug in the previous 30 days. And these are respondents who work for an employer with a drug testing program. So in theory, somewhat comparable to the DTI data, right? DTI is only among those workplaces that do drug testing. This national survey data is reflective of those respondents who work for an employer who do such testing. I think it's interesting if you look at the 2000 and 2001 data that those two rates are relatively similar. Starting in 2002, however, we started seeing higher self-reported use of an illicit drug relative to what we were actually detecting in our urine workplace drug tests. And it leads me to wonder, is maybe some of that a result of what donors have the opportunity to do in the privacy of the restroom? So I believe that perhaps part of this broadening between those two is reflective of that. The other interesting piece is that if you look between 2002 and 2011, yes, there's some ups and downs, but it's relatively constant. If you take that long-term, averaging with your eye view, looks relatively constant. But in 2012 and 2013, the self-reported use among this group went up. Now let's look at those respondents who work for an employer without a drug testing program. 50% higher self-reported use, not surprisingly, of an illicit drug from those respondents who work for an employer without a drug testing program. And rather than just seeing increases over the course of the last 2 years, in the one set, we're now seeing among those not subject to drug testing, it looks like we've seen increases over the course of the last 4 years. And I'm really anxious to see what the 2014 data will bring. It's also important to note that the self-reported use is at its highest level ever on the National Survey of Drug Use and Health. And one of the, to me, scary pieces, specifically about marijuana, is that not only is its use at its highest level ever, they have started reporting regularly, essentially on the frequency of use, what they refer to as almost daily current users, or almost daily annual users. So an almost daily current user is somebody who's used it 20 days out of the last month. Almost daily past year user has used it 300 times, 300 uses over the course of the last year. And those numbers are up significantly. So not only is use increasing, the frequency of use is increasing. That should scare all of us as we're thinking about having a safe and productive work environment. Let's look at a comparison between specimen types for urine, oral fluid, and hair next. You've seen this urine positivity data before. There's oral fluid overlaid. Wow, I heard that out there. It is wow. It's a big wow. Earlier on, we had higher positivity rates in urine than oral fluid. That gap narrowed, flattened out. Since 2008, it's been higher in oral fluid than urine. Over the course of the last 3 years, it is significantly higher than what we're seeing in urine drug tests. It's twice as high. Look at that 2014 data, twice as many positives on an oral fluid test than on a urine test. And of all the drugs in an oral fluid test, marijuana has the shortest detection window. You're lucky to go much beyond 36 hours, maybe 48 in a very heavy chronic user. So that speaks to the power, I think, of the observed collection. So yes, clearly the shorter detection window, you may be missing some people on the back end, but all those people that used to study for the test before they went into the bathroom, that's a little tough to do with an oral fluid test, which are typically collected by the hiring manager or some place or some person much more proximate to the job offer. As we look at hair, that's a lifestyle test. That's a pattern of repetitive use. Look at the percentages for oral fluid and hair over the course of the last 2 years. They're almost equivalent. Colorado and Washington showed a 14% increase in 2014 as compared with 2013. That's roughly the same rate of change as what we saw nationally. So remember, double digit, around 20% or more. Colorado and Washington between 2012 and 2013. 14% in Colorado and Washington, on par with the national average between 2013 and 2014. Cocaine, we've been reporting on declines in cocaine positivity. We're consistently seeing more positives in oral fluid for cocaine than we do in urine. We clearly are seeing an increase in positivity rates in 2013 and 2014. 2013 went up about 16%. 2014, the positivity rate went up over 30%. That's a big increase. We didn't see that type of increase compared with 9% in the urine data for the same time period. As we look at hair, again, higher use, it was starting to tail off, stayed flat really through 2013, but then we had a big increase in 2014. So we have, I think, data that more or less is pointing to increasing cocaine use that we're picking up in our workplace drug tests. But I think something is really going on when we see it across all 3 specimen types in 2014, and we see 2 consecutive years in the general workforce. Methamphetamine. More pronounced picture as we look at the US general workforce data. So 3 consecutive years, 2012, 2013, 2014, all went up in positivity rate for methamphetamine on our urine drug tests in the US general workforce. Amphetamine, that's most commonly associated with the use of illicit or prescription drugs. In the US general workforce, again, year-over-year increases, and both of those are at their highest levels ever. 6-acetylmorphine, the heroin-specific metabolite in the US general workforce, the positivity rate has essentially doubled between 2011 and 2014. This data is consistent with what the National Survey of Drug Use and Health says, talking about essentially a doubling of heroin users over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. This is a problem. Prescription opiates on the street have become so expensive, heroin is cheaper. And we see people moving to a more cost-effective, shall we put it, air quotes, cost-effective alternative. So let's focus on the expanded opiates for just a second. First of all, hydrocodone. We've been reporting on year-over-year increases in hydrocodone positivity. We've been comparing that with the year-over-year increases in the number of prescriptions. Because everyone knows that hydrocodone is the #1 prescribed drug in terms of volume of prescriptions in the United States, even still today. So not surprising that we're seeing this in our data. What's encouraging is that it peaked in 2011, went down in 2012, and at least has been holding steady. It's not continuing to increase year over year. Hydromorphone, some ups and downs, but we're still basically seeing slight or modest increases in hydromorphone positivity. And hydromorphone we could detect either as a drug on its own, or it could be present as a metabolite of somebody who's taking hydrocodone. And then oxycodone, last but not least. We seem to have passed the, at least epidemic in positivity that we've been seeing. So we were seeing year-over-year increases through 2011, but 2012 it went down, 2013 it went down, 2014 it went down. All good news, probably a testament to what's happening in Florida and other states in trying to restrict the availability of this drug and stop some of the so-called pill mills that were out there and make it much harder to get. But that drives up price, and as you drive up price, what do? You switch to other drugs, so this is probably partly responsible for that increase in heroin positivity that we're reporting. That should scare all of us. It should be a sobering thought to all employers and should remind employers and policymakers of the risks that these drugs represent for society and for safety and compliance, and that they can't get complacent. Yes, we talked about prescription drugs, but illicit drug use is still a problem, and employers do need to remain vigilant. I want to thank you for your time.
There's a significant issue going on with drug use seeming to be rising, and safety is a big concern.
It's alarming, and it's probably going to impact our business in terms of, what we recommend to our clients.
The DTI is so very important because you see the trends of what's going on with drug use in the United States.
Well, I think it's the one bit of information that people can know and trust, that it's just information. And, information can be powerful if it's used in the right context.
Dr. Sample's presentation and providing the latest statistics was really awakening to me to see that in the past couple of years, year over year, across the board, drug use is increasing.
I think the information that he presents, he's able to condense it in a way where even a novice is going to understand what it is that he's talking about, and he hits the high points.